Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's edition of Shop Talk, hosted by the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group. And tonight we have a full house, which means I think it's like 7s over 3s. We have over this way Mala. How you doing, Mala?
Good evening, everyone. Doing well.
We have this way, we've got Mike. How's it going, Mike?
Very well, thank you. Hope everybody's doing well.
And I'm pretty sure that makes Tracy a pair of 7s so that we get our full house. How you doing, Tracy?
Doing good. How's everyone else?
Does anybody know the Aspen Dental DVA? They are having issues. No, but it sounds like it's painful, like pulling teeth. All right, with that awful joke aside, let's talk shop. And in case this is your first time here, Shop Talk is basically it's Monday evening after work, at least on the East Coast, and we're just going to talk a little bit, maybe some technical questions. If you have any questions, chat. This is actually a chat-driven show, which then gets derailed by my ranting. But hypothetically, this is a chat-driven show, so drop your questions in. We'll talk. In the meantime, we do have a couple of brief announcement things we want to talk about, and then the news that hit literally the day after our last episode of Shop Talk that I was under NDA and was not allowed to talk about at that point in time. It happens. But first, before that, Data Kelly. Data Kelly is coming up.
Wait, are you in prison? Are you broadcasting from prison?
Who's that?
You.
No, I've got a green screen. There's no green screens in prison.
I don't know. Maybe they sent you to a cushy one. I don't know.
That's his usual green screen.
Yeah. Now, Tracy, you were on mute, so we couldn't hear.
I was making an NDA joke. So.
Oh, I see.
No, that's in the background to get your picture taken as they book you as you go into prison. They have one of those too. You know.
Well, I guess now Tracy's ruined it and has let everyone know where I am. On the plus side, on Foursquare, I am now captain of the prison. So I got that going for me. So Data Kelly is coming up on Friday. And, you know, one of these years I may learn how to pronounce it correctly. But in the meantime, I'm just going to...
Keeley. That's what I thought. But...
I thought it was Kelly, and then I thought it was Kaylee, and then it might have been something else.
Keely. I thought it
could be Keely.
I thought it was Keely, but, you know, hey, I don't know.
Basically, it's an event in Dublin, Ireland.
No, nothing.
So
it's Andrew's event. That's easy. That's my easy way of saying it.
Yeah, but then you have to say Prusky or is it Prusky? And it is Prusky, but you know he won't correct you if you say his name incorrectly. So then you can go call him the wrong name for years, and he'll just accept it. And then you're like, "What do you mean? This isn't what?" So anyhow, that's happening. Actually, flying out tomorrow, which means I need to make bail by tomorrow, I guess, if we're going with my being booked. Matt is Irish. That's that is true, Anders. It is Irish. None has been pronouncing either of my names for 33 years. In fairness, I did ask you, and you're like, no, I prefer the Americanized pronunciation. So I asked.
So I'm guessing there's a Norwegian pronunciation that nobody knows what it is. I'll ask Catherine when I see her next. Or Johan or somebody.
Right. But anyhow, that's coming up. You know, in case anybody wants to take a last second trip to Ireland, grab your passport and then go to the conference. I mean, it's a good place. But Mala also has a code for Past Summit in case you want to attend Past Summit, which probably is a little bit closer for most of our audience.
So Summit discount pricing ends in about 2 days. The pricing is there, and we got from the WIT group, we got an additional $150 off if you use the code. I'm typing it in the chat. If anyone is interested, if you put that code in, it gets you another $150 off over that pricing. If anyone is going. I think Anders is going. I don't know of anyone else.
Yeah, it sounds like Anders already paid. But them's the breaks, I suppose. So
We just got it 2 days ago after some haggling, so I'm sorry that it's late. They
yeah,
don't have very many codes going out this time, uh, but we got one.
TriPass didn't. We didn't get a code. So I mean, we still kept the name mostly because it's our name now. But oh well. Early registration ends on the 7th. Yeah, so get that in
Yeah.
by Thursday and save a little bit of extra scratch.
I'll actually say that the speaker lineup is looking pretty awesome. So you won't be disappointed there if you plan to go.
So there you go. But remember, this year it is in person. It's in person only. It's not hybrid this year, right?
Yes, only in person.
Okay. Yeah. So you want to go? Got to be there in person. And not enough fabric. Well, we're going to talk about that right now. That actually is item number 2 on my agenda. So build happened the day after our last shop talk episode, and basically I think I can sum up build as 70% generative AI, 30% Microsoft Fabric, at least when it comes to data platform. Apparently those are the only 2 data platform technologies that Microsoft is invested in at this point in time, at least based on build. But bringing it back, yeah, you gotta. That's a good point. Anders gets credit for bringing us back on topic instead of derailing it for once. So it's like putting that penny in on the wobbly train that just happens to knock it right back in line. But generative AI, we've talked about that enough. Mike has been pro, I've been anti. We've had our discussions. So we can leave that part aside for today. Microsoft Fabric, that's a different story. Fabric, if you're not familiar, like you've not listened to anything from anybody on the data platform space for like 2 weeks, Fabric is a new offering that's in public preview now. And the idea is that it's intended to be a software as a service solution for modern data warehousing, business intelligence, analytics, and the whole shebang. It is intended to be a software as a service replacement for Azure Synapse Analytics. Azure Synapse Analytics will still be around. That is the platform as a service offering. But they're definitely pushing Fabric really hard. Also, I hate the name. I think it's a really dumb name. But they're not changing the name, even though I say it's dumb. So that's all right. I'll just make fun of the name for the next 3 years until marketing changes it to something totally different. And they may actually have a better name. We'll find out. Otherwise, it might be like Microsoft Fabric XP R2. But we'll see.
Power Fabric.
Power Fabric, Azure Fabric for Azure. So, okay, since I'm ranting about the name, part of the reason I dislike the name, 2 reasons. Reason the first, Fabric as a concept means almost nothing to data platform people. It's like, this is clothing, this is cloth. There's very little technical concept of, oh, I understand what this is intended to mean. There is a relatively small number of data platform professionals whom 3 weeks ago you could say, talk about this data fabric, and would give you a coherent answer instead of just trying to mumble something out on the spot. So that's problem number 1. Fabric's not a term that we use. It's not a concept we live with. It's not and it's also part B of this. It's not a cool name. It'd be okay if it was a cool name that didn't really mesh very well. For example, Synapse. Synapse isn't a thing technically for data platform people, but it's a cool sounding name. And it sounds fancy and scientific and fun. And so, all right, that's a fine name. Fabric, not so cool. Matrix, the Azure Matrix. That actually would be okay, especially I'm starting to read some Shadowrun books, so
It's like the name Mesh. When they came up with Mesh, Mesh is like fabric. I mean, everybody's accepted Mesh, so
well,
I don't know. They just pull words out there. I literally think they just went to some word generator thing and said, "Give me a random word," and said, "Oh, That one seems okay. They might have picked the fifth one it came up with, but
I mean, you could
they may have came up with something even dumber than Fabric.
have. Never discount Microsoft marketing's ability to come up with dumb names. So, Mike, you were saying mesh lawsuits?
Yeah, mesh is a technique to hold parts of your organs together.
Ah, okay. Well, it's also the inner lining on swim trunks, which, as we all know, is the internet.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying the mesh has been used in a lot of different things, and it's it's a type of fabric as well, but it's actually used as a computer terminology as well. So
Yeah.
it's not now they're just stealing more clothing terminology, or was it the other way around? I
So,
get confused at this point.
yeah, so this is kind of
One day
problem number.
technology will claim they invented fabric instead of fabric being here first.
Right. So this is problem one. That look, the name, you can make it make sense, but it's kind of a dumb name. Problem number two is historically there have also been things called Service Fabric and App Fabric, and even better, App Fabric, which kind of didn't exist, or still kind of exists still, but. So if you go searching for fabric help on fabric setup, you probably still are going to pull up some App Fabric blog posts. But even better, the URL to reach Microsoft Fabric is app.fabric.microsoft.com or something like that. It's like, okay, so your website is App Fabric, and we're going to tell people go to App Fabric, and then some developer head is going to say, wait, App Fabric, and disrail us like we're doing here. It's not a good name. Marketing team probably used ChatGPT to get name ideas. Solomon, you may be onto something. This is why they bought OpenAI.
They used something to randomly come up with a name. They had to.
Mesh is
That's
used
how
for
all
Wi-Fi.
good names
Yeah,
are born.
yeah. Mesh is definitely used for is terminology for Wi-Fi. There is the concept of data mesh, which was a data. It's a analytics system concept that is more vague and architectural, and kind of gets to, I guess, where Microsoft is trying to go. But they can't call Fabric mesh because then things would get really weird, I guess. I don't know. In all fairness, with so many products as they push out, I'd hate to be in charge of naming. I can't come up with column names most days. There are only three things hard in computer science: naming and off by one errors.
Declaring variables. Oh, that's a different story.
Last time I heard words like this, I went Googling for meanings, and that wasn't fun, so not doing it again. Yeah, I think I might know what you're talking about, Mala. But yep. All right, I got you.
Yeah, you and Marshall would know.
Yep, and it was funny. So anyhow, that's the name. That's probably all I'm going to say about the name for at least 5 minutes. But the concept, basically, Synapse was this notion of we're going to try to integrate together dedicated SQL pools, the serverless SQL pool, Spark pools, Data Explorer pools, pipelines, Azure Data Factory, change data capture through Synapse Link. We're going to try to link together all of these different things. And it was moderately successful at the job. It was hard to work between the different resources. Like, here's my dedicated SQL pool, here's my Data Explorer pool. I want to query data from the Data Explorer pool in my dedicated SQL pool. How do I do that? Use Synapse pipelines to ETL data out from one system into the other system within your Synapse workspace. And so that's when you realize, oh, these aren't really integrated systems. These aren't really the same thing. I can't join data together from these different sources very easily. The serverless SQL pool and Spark pools could read from a data lake pretty easily. dedicated SQL pools could kind of read from a data lake sometimes. But you couldn't easily join together tables unless you set up weird things. Like you could use external tables sometimes, but you couldn't, if I remember right, you can't use an external table from a serverless SQL pool into a dedicated SQL pool. And that kind of hurts the ability to claim that you've really got this unified solution. And this is what Fabric is working toward. It's trying to say, we don't care what tools you're using to access the data. It's all the same data under the covers. It's all the same storage. It's happening in this thing called One Lake, which is basically their take on the lakehouse concept that Databricks came up with a few years back, and where your data is stored in Parquet format, and so Parquet files in Delta format, which means that we're capturing essentially transaction logs as well with the base data. And then regardless of what tool you're using, that could be Management Studio, it could be writing T-SQL statements through that. It could be a .NET driver or a Java driver. It could be PySpark running notebooks. It could be Power BI querying data in. I don't care what your interface is. We still want to get the same data in roughly the same way using the same security settings in good time. And that's kind of the ideal that they're aiming for. Definitely not fully there yet, but again, this is a product that's in public preview, so don't expect everything to be there. There is some additional stuff that will be coming out as public preview goes along. There are some things that we have learned since the original build announcements, like what the pricing looks like. And so pricing is going to be a little bit different from what we had with Synapse. With Synapse, it's consumption-based. It's your dedicated SQL pool is up for so many hours, and that's going to be X number of dollars. Your serverless SQL pool is charged based on data processing and $5 per terabyte processed. Your storage account is charged an amount of gigabytes of data per month. So it's something like, $23 per terabyte per month, somewhere around there. Your Spark pools are based on CPU time that it's up. Your Data Explorer pool is based on the amount of data you're ingesting. The Synapse pipelines are based on arcane druidic ruins that they found somewhere in Wales, and so on. So instead, Fabric basically says, pay us some amount of money and you'll get the capacity. And that capacity is kind of a broad base. You cap out on however much internal compute and memory utilization across all of these different services. And so it's a lot more like Power BI Premium in the sense of you pay a certain amount of money per month for this access. If you want things faster, you can pay more money for more capacity, but you're not going to be able to micro optimize like you could with Synapse, where, oh, well, if you just never use the dedicated SQL pool and use the serverless SQL pool for everything and you micro optimize your queries, you could get your Synapse data warehouse for $30 a month if it's a small warehouse. But with Fabric, it's going to be a little bit different. Starts out at 36 cents an hour. Actually, I'll drop in a link to the blog post that covers this. The F2 capacity is 36 cents an hour, so about $260 a month. Realistic, I think, for a company, you're starting out at probably closer to like F8, which is about $1,000 a month. But this is $1,000 a month for your warehousing and analytics and reporting. So not too awful. But Anders does point out, I love all these new things, and most companies can't move past a database is just really fancy Excel. I mean, that's true. Now, Mala, you had a bunch of questions that you wanted to ask about this.
Yes, I did. So when do I know this is the right choice for me versus data mart and a traditional data warehouse? That's my first question.
All right. So there we go. I had to drop the pun in chat. Okay. Fabric versus Power BI data marts versus build your own dang warehouse. And I would say Power BI data marts are really, they're self-service BI. This is what you give to a business analyst when you don't have developers who are willing to put together a proper warehouse, and you just want them to wing it. I'm being slightly unfair, but data marts are definitely entry level. The you must be this tall to ride the ride is way, way down low. And it's intentionally way down low. It's not the type of thing that established companies that have engineering teams dedicated to analytics really should be offering. Instead, you should have that central IT driven solution. Now, a classical data warehouse works in a lot of cases, and that is still something you could absolutely run on premises using SQL Server or Oracle or some other product like that. Where Fabric aims to make its way in is in a couple of places. One is as your warehouse gets more non-relational sources. So if you need to bring in large amounts of text data or image data or video and audio data for machine learning work, as you bring in more of this, this is what we've been shoving into data lakes for the last decade. And so the idea here is that instead of having a data lake for that semi-structured or non-regularly structured, the not the relational data, and then a warehouse for the relational data, and some mechanism that tries to figure out which of these I'm querying from. Instead, if you put it all into the data lake and you expose the data from the data lake as though it were in a relational database, then you get to this notion of a lake house. So it is a data warehouse whose contents are really stored in a data lake and are really structured off of a data lake.
So as a SQL person, is T-SQL enough for me to work with this thing, or do I need to learn, R or Spark or all that other stuff to make use of it?
So as it is today with Fabric, for the most part, yeah, you could just live in T-SQL. Because the whole concept is at the end of the day, we're talking about Parquet files in Delta format. And everything on top of that is commentary. Everything on top of that is, how do you want to access this data? Do you want to access it through T-SQL? Well, let's expose a data warehouse or a data lake house, and let's bring in these files, call them tables. Parquet format is structured data. It has columns. It has data types. It interacts generally pretty nicely with what we think of in T-SQL. There are some things that in SQL aren't so easy to work around, like nested arrays or JSON operations within Parquet files, but you even still have ways around this. It's not as easy to think about as classical. I have ints and strings and floats and bits and whatever. But still, you have those files. They're Parquet format. You can bring up. You could expose it with T-SQL. You could write T-SQL and just work with that as it is. Then, if somebody else is more familiar with Python or is more familiar with R or wants to access it in a different way, they're accessing the same data that you are. There's no ETL. There's no transformation from one system to another or joining 2 or 3 systems together so that you can get the data. So it's really intended to be...
That makes sense.
Yeah, more of like a central location for all of this analytical data. Even Data Explorer. So this has been a thing that was the least well integrated part of Synapse. Synapse Data Explorer pools stored data in their own system. They didn't really talk to any of the other pools. They really worked independently, and it was essentially Azure Data Explorer just in a Synapse workspace. And so the way that works under the covers to make KQL queries fast made it difficult to integrate with the rest of your data lake. And with Fabric, one of the things that they are doing is taking that Data Explorer concept, and you're still going to have your data ingested directly into Data Explorer. But they're also making a mirror copy of that data in your OneLake, so that you can still access that from SQL, from Spark, from whatever else, and you get an integration that you didn't have with Synapse.
That sounds interesting for those who are working with that kind of a combination of stuff.
Yeah. So Marshall's saying some people still think that's a magic box. Databases are a magic box that handles everything, needs no attention or maintenance. Yeah. And now to this point, because we can bring it back to Fabric. Because Fabric is software as a service, a lot of the administration is handled differently. So it's a software as a service product.
How does security work? I was just coming to that.
Yeah. How does security work? Okay. So all of the integration points within services is handled under the covers. You're not administering that. With Synapse, you had to decide, do you want this in a managed virtual network or not? If you have it in a managed virtual network, do you want data exfiltration protection or not? If you check that box for data exfiltration protection, life gets a lot harder. You have to set up private endpoints. You have to connect all the services together yourself. It's doable, obviously, but it takes a fair amount of effort. With Fabric, all that stuff's set up for you. Administration of Fabric is more like administration of Power BI, where they're actually using something very similar to the Power BI administrator interface. And so you have basically, here are your software settings versus I'm making sure that services are patched. I'm making sure that services are running. You're not starting and stopping pools. You're not doing that level of administration. You're still doing data administration in the sense of, I have new data. I want to set this up. I want to create effectively a warehouse. And here is the raw data. Here is my refining process. Here are the flows that I'm building to transform my data and then make it accessible to end users. So you're still doing classic business intelligence work, ETL or ELT. But what you're not doing is installing patches or directly managing the platform elements. You're not setting up virtual networks. You're not doing a lot of the things that were either relatively difficult in Synapse or actually not even possible. Like, you couldn't have a custom virtual network. It was managed or none. So administration is a bit different, and I expect we'll probably see more details on exactly what administration entails over time. There's a bit of emphasis on data governance, so tighter integration with Microsoft Purview and kind of focusing in again on the end scenario, which is Power BI. Fabric is very heavily biased toward using Power BI. Power BI is the major endpoint for Fabric. You can absolutely use other services. You could write custom applications that query from your one lake. You can connect to warehouses using SQL Server Management Studio or ODBC drivers in your apps. But in all of these cases of, I want to do SQL-like queries, I want to do Spark processing, I want to do data science or data engineering, I want to have real-time analytics, all these different scenarios, the end is often, I want to make that available in Power BI and let business users work off of the data. So there's a much closer integration with Power BI. It's much more intentionally designed for here is my end result, which is for a business person to get information that potentially helps that person make good decisions. And that's the ideal. Whether they'll hit that mark appropriately, we're going to see. And to Andrew's point of, I don't learn anything new from Microsoft until the name is stuck for 2 years. Yeah, it's probably going to take a couple years before we know how well it succeeds. The good news is, unlike a bunch of SQL Server stuff, Microsoft is committed enough to this that they're going to keep working on it for a little while at least. So we're not going to have that V1, this kind of halfway works, but it doesn't quite do the job for me, so I can't use it, so nobody ever works on it, so it never gets better, so then it dies off. Not that we can't name like a half dozen features in SQL Server that worked out that way, just off the top of our heads.
Oh my, yeah.
I mean, that's almost like a parlor game where you just go, okay, everybody name a feature that never got V2 because, it didn't get enough love. And just go around until somebody misses. But yeah, I would expect that we're going to see a lot in terms of development effort and money spent on enhancing Fabric over the course of the next couple of years. And I do expect to see things better than they currently are in public preview. Where it is in public preview, I think, is good enough to get started with, to try it out, see how it works. By the time it's GA, I think it should cover a pretty good number of warehousing scenarios. And over time, I expect it to cover more and more scenarios. But I'm thinking that by the time you're in GA, I don't know that there's a good reason to create a new Synapse workspace. I think at that point, it's just use Fabric. Is there autopilot for Fabric yet? I don't know. If you're talking like Copilot style, that's my official stance on this.
Hello, I like that. Yeah, that's funny.
Well done, Mike.
Once in a while, I get lucky.
All right.
So that podcast I posted, Patrick LeBlanc talks to various people every week. Some of it is more interesting than others. I like this one. It is about the team that built this Fabric thing, but they end up talking more about how SSA has evolved as a product, which is like, a really fun story to listen to for people who like that kind of stuff. Not a lot of heavy tech or anything. So have some fun listening to it.
Yeah, was that with Arun?
Yeah, Arun, yeah.
Okay.
The Israeli person.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Then we get the opportunity to have Luddites who push back on these newfangled machines. I mean, Anders is in chat. You don't have to call him out directly. I keep pushing back since the Commodore 64. That's our VIC-20 or bust. So
I don't think it's sidetracked. I think, I don't know if sidetracked is the word I would use for it. Maybe.
I would.
You would?
Yeah,
And it's more about sidetracked with LLM than it is about AI stuff.
Yeah.
Overall. Yeah.
LLMs are where a lot of money is going at the moment because apparently once that crypto bubble popped, they needed to dump money into somewhere useless. NVIDIA needs to sell their cards after all. So Yeah. I don't know. I, yeah, that's my official stance right now. I don't want to dive too much further into it, but I do think that probably about 70% of the work that OpenAI is putting out is going to be not well received within the next year and a half as people find out that copying and pasting code from Stack Overflow is still a better answer than using Copilot. I mean, if you're going to have people who don't know how to develop, then they at least need to be able to Google stuff. Otherwise, Copilot will generate garbage. I actually did some
I had
training.
it on for 2 days. I hated it.
I'm going to spend more time on Copilot specifically. I tried out. I went to a training on OpenAI. It was a 3-day training using their models for code generation, so Codex models, and the step-by-step labs. One of them, my favorite one, was have a comment here that says R programming language, and then below it a function that does something. I forget exactly what the function is. So I run this first outcome. I look at it, it's like, this is Python code. Okay, so let me clear that out and try it again. Second outcome, this is a series of comments that looks like it was grabbed from somebody else's project that extends on the original comment from here. So that's not our programming language code. Third example that I ran, nope, this is a different function that doesn't do what the code comment even says that it should do. And then I look at the step-by-step lab because that's well done, very well done. It's got pictorial instructions, and it shows the generated code. And I look at it and I'm like, that is also Python code. So in other words, this thing was 0 for 4 in terms of generating an R programming function when you say use the R programming language.
It's got more examples of Python to train on.
So how does it get certain kinds of data, Kevin? That's kind of what baffles me. I know they train it on all kinds of data, but stuff that, code that somebody else wrote, and like, for example, when I was trying to rewrite my resume, it pulled things that I had said somewhere in a podcast interview with somebody. How does it make those connections?
So I'll give the brief version, and Mike, if you want to jump in further from there, I will not be negative in this entire paragraph. Oh, second cat call. So
I love that. Second cat call. Go on. Brilliant, Kevin. Good one. Go on.
All right. So the way going specifically to Codex models and to things like Copilot, like Mike said, this is trained heavily on Python code. It's coming a lot out of GitHub repos. GitHub specifically for Copilot trained heavily on their repositories, which has some potential legal quirkiness. But anyhow, they know what language is being used because they know file names. So .py, .r, .cs, .fs, etc. And so you have that training built off of the repository, the public repositories. Potentially, they can train off of private repositories. So, for example, Microsoft might have something internal where they're training off of all of the Microsoft code base for Windows, for Visual Studio, for SQL Server, all those hundreds of millions of lines of code. And then they could generate something internally with that additional level of effort that they're not going to expose to the general public. But you have to have a base set, a sample of this is code. This is code that is doing something, and then you're combining tokens together. You're tokenizing statements, and you're trying to figure out what are the tokens that fit best together. You figure out what are the tokens that come next typically, and generate outcomes. For things like you're generating a resume, that if it's pulling stuff off of resources, that could be that is a little bit more interesting, noting that whatever you're pulling it from has to have been old enough that it was part of the training set. But there could be things like searching for your name, and what are things that come up typically with your name. Now, let it go long enough, and it'll talk about podcasts you were never on and books you never wrote and all that fun stuff. But because it's not a truth model, but it can basically find, given this token, Mala Mahadevan, there aren't too many people with your name in the world, and you probably show up. You're probably the Mala who shows up the most in Google searches. So, given the raw training set, it may be relatively easier to find things about you. Now, if somebody else happens to share your same name and wants to build a resume, the person may get some weird results that I was never on that show.
Interesting.
But anything you wanted to add to that, Mike?
No, certainly more about the science than me. I would just add that, like, it's certainly better at some things than others. Some stuff's behind firewalls, like they didn't train it on SQL code at Duke, for example, and some languages are just more not heavily used, like Kotlin or Scala or stuff like that. Scala, so they're just not going to have tons of data on it. But
right.
Yeah, that's a limitation. So I saw one video where the developer was kind of like, here's where it's good at stuff, in their opinion, and here's where it's bad. Although I've also been hearing, too, that they're starting to nerf it. A lot of people are canceling their subscriptions because they're getting weird results that they're not, like, just even a couple of weeks ago, it was giving them better output. I'm talking about specifically programming.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that is an issue that we'll find with models you don't own. So I have tried out. I've got a new NVIDIA card. As far as the IRS is concerned, that is absolutely a business expense because I'm definitely using it for large language models, and I actually am. I'm using the wizard base, except without a lot of the bias that you get from OpenAI and from other companies that answer questions in very specific ways that are humans putting their thumbs on the scale in a way that I don't want. And so anyhow, been working with that. But if you have a model that you're relying on from OpenAI or from Facebook or Meta or whatever they're calling themselves today to avoid the justice system cracking down on them, or whoever, they can change the model on you. They don't have to tell you that it's changed. The results can be different. They can be worse. And how are you going to reproduce this? It's already fairly arbitrary. I guess you could say, well, I'm going to use the same temperature, the same seed, the same top end, the same parameters. But even then, you still get arbitrary outcomes. You can still get different outcomes from this because they're probabilistic. Like, the only way you could guarantee a specific outcome is if you set the temperature to almost zero. Temperature, by the way, in generative AI is you're setting for essentially how creative you want the model to be, how many possible paths can it look at for what the next token would look like, and how much do you want to weigh the highest probability versus all of those other possible tokens. So if the next token is cat with 30% probability, we pick up cat. If the temperature is low, we're going to bias toward using the word cat. If temperature is higher, we're going to weigh more heavily like those lower in the list. So we might get goldfish. And then once you have the word goldfish, well, the next token could be something totally different. So basically, it's really hard to troubleshoot and get predictable results to indicate that there is some sort of regression problem. And so I could see people finding issues with it. Now, some of the issue could be it's lost the shine of, oh, this is really cool. And then you start using it and you realize this isn't quite as cool as I thought it was. I came into this already very negative. So it hasn't gotten worse, in my opinion, at least for me, in my opinion.
So most AI, in my opinion, is when it really has value is when you barely notice the transition. like GPS and stuff like that. When it came out, it was like some of us were into it, some of us were not into it. It ended up giving wrong directions too in some cases. But over time, it's evolved, and now it's like nobody cares, and everybody uses it when you need it, and it's become second nature. So I think that's how it's not a miracle that's going to happen tomorrow like that. I don't know. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, and there have been improvements in algorithms for mapping, for direction finding, wayfinding. Like the math has been fairly stable on that, but there have been algorithmic improvements, and we're probably going to see that with other generations of models. But yeah, it'll take some time, and I think we're definitely at near the higher end of the hype cycle curve. It will crash down, and we'll probably come back up at some point to that realistic expectation of, oh, well, I can use Stable Diffusion or Midjourney or Dolly or something to generate some images, and realizing what the limitations of it are, that it won't be perfect, it won't be complete, it won't be everything that I need from it, from an artist, but can live with it. Or that
So
I
the
can...
other thing about art, what I'm hearing from my artist friends, to many of whom are concerned and such, is that the only hope there is that the best art is usually something that's never produced on demand. It's when the artist is in a place when they truly want to create something and they make it, not because somebody else wants it. So to my mind, that's a hope that we can have, that that kind of art is still going to be produced by people.
Yeah, well, there will be. There's I
I
don't
haven't
know.
tried Dali or anything
Yeah,
yet anyway.
I don't want to be too ludditish, I guess, or even curmudgeonly about it, because I consider generative AI in that sense more of an instrument than an outcome. So if you look at it as this is another tool that is available, that it's like I can use colored pencils, I can use brushes, I can use acrylic paints, I can use watercolors, I can use different styles and get different images, and I could use generative AI to create this type of image. In that sense, yeah, there's a human. There's no ghost in the shell there. There's a human involved at the end of the day, and even if you do think of it as a process that will generate outcomes, versus a tool, then there's absolutely going to be places for humans. I think that idea of, oh, well, Stable Diffusion version 6 or whatever will replace everything. No, that won't happen. Any more than acrylic paints replaced all other types of painting material. It's a tool that serves a purpose in a specific location and has its strengths, it has its weaknesses. And certainly at this point in time, there are still weaknesses, like as long as you want people with 5 fingers, for example. However, with Stable Diffusion, you could get 7-finger death punch. So, I mean, all right. How long before we figure out how to generate a bunch of completely invalid data and put that into training materials fed into these LLMs so that their output is even worse than it is today? I'm sure 4chan is hard at work on that. COBOL fixer salary, it seems like a reasonable life achievement. If AI is trained on AI content, is that a doom loop? Does it have gibberish results? So Mike asked that question. The short answer is maybe, but probably not. The longer answer is there is a concept in machine learning of self-learning, of it's called semi-supervised learning. And the way that it works is you start with a core set of known good information. You train a model on that small set of information, and then you have it generate a bunch of predictions. And then, as a human, you look at a small subset of the predictions, and you say maybe like 1,000. And then you grade each one of those, and you say, was this correct or incorrect? And then you train the model on that new corpus. have it generate more, train a small amount more. And you kind of have these cycles of I'm training. And as a model gets more correct answers, as it gets smarter about this generated data, you could have it learn on its own. You could have it train on these results and occasionally get fed in new information to make sure it doesn't go completely off the rails. So not necessarily a problem. Now, it is possible to go off the rails because if you have the outcomes, you have the predicted outcomes, and you train based on the predicted outcomes, and you don't know which ones are correct and which ones are incorrect, then there's no guarantee that you're going to end up with a model that gets more things correct than before, because you could actually make it worse. You could introduce some set of weird edge case that starts taking over and gives you worse results because you don't have anything directly to compare it against. And that's the tricky part. That's why you usually have some trainer, some system in place that has known good answers, has the actual correct answers that you can feed it back into. And Tracy did have to drop, which is unfortunate because I was going to talk to her about some function stuff that we'll talk about next time around. But isn't most of the data on the internet completely invalid already? Once again, I appreciate 4chan. I don't know what you're talking about, Anders. Solomon says, if the autopilot exercise was to generate Python code, then it did work, even if you had to do it by asking for R code. It does. 8kun, way better than 8chan. No, not that I know any of this. So, yeah, Solomon, Python is where most of the training is done. And there are other languages, and this is all going to depend on what system you're using. In that case, I was using OpenAI's Codex trained models. I was trying to think of the word there. So I was using Codex trained models, trying to generate code examples. With GitHub Copilot, it's going to be a little bit different. In that case, I had it generate some F# code as a lark, and it did actually generate F# code. I still intend to try it with a few other things, see how it works. I do have a license for it, so might as well get some use out of it. But the exercise was to generate R code. I mean, this is like if you answer the question, if I say answer this question in German and you answer it in Norwegian, as it doesn't count. Even if the answer were correct, which it actually wasn't, that Python code was wrong, but got to be in the language. So the worst thing to ask it about itself, like where did you find something? It goes nuts if you ask that. I think, Mala, that's part of the human influence, the OpenAI. What's the right word? I'll use the term busybodies. Technical assistants, whatever. But these are the people putting their thumbs on the scale because people like to troll machines. Ask Microsoft Tay, and so they put in a bunch of stuff to keep people from, I don't know, doing things that the researchers or technical people don't want them to do.
Oh, so it's intentional, you're saying? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's good to know, Kevin.
Like who should I kidnap to destabilize the government? Like crazy stuff like that.
Let me find. There's a really good. Here it is. Really good blog post. I really like this from Eric Hartford. It's on uncensored models, and actually, I'm using this for locally. The idea is, look, I don't want OpenAI's bias. I don't want Facebook's bias. I don't want this political bias, that political bias, whatever political bias. If I want to put on a political bias or a business bias or some type of bias after the fact, that's fine. Let me put it on, but give me the unbiased model up front. And that's what Eric Hartford is trying to do. And the way that he did it was he went through the 70,000 question answer pairs that are training for Wizard in this case. This is one type of LLM, and tried to pull out the ones that were leading toward bias, and then retrain based off of the remaining set. And the answer is radically different from the final models that you'll get online. So there's a lot of humans putting their thumbs on the scales in any published model. And there's no inherent problem with that if that's the intent of what you want. Like, for example, if I have a business that's using an LLM to auto-generate text, I probably want one that will explicitly avoid, explicit materials, where I don't want my chatbot having explicit conversations with customers. And so you train that out. Versus if I have a service where I am, having explicit conversations for $2.95 a minute, 976 chatbot, which by the way might actually be a real number. I don't know. Please don't call it. But if you have that service, then obviously you want to train it and maybe like take out, questions on accounting. But the notion is you start out with a base and then you can apply whatever you want on top of that. You can train it to go one way and not another. Anders was the #1 shooter in the world, as well as the front man of a death metal band, Old Norse Vikings. Jerry Michalek would be proud. Good job, Anders. Okay, I predict next year's new tech will be stone tablets. Seems reasonable. And then Apple will have limited edition iStone. Yeah, that's the one that's really going to get people. It'll be like $900, and it'll be exactly the same type of stone that you get elsewhere, but it's going to cost 3 times as much.
The shipping cost.
That's a very good blog post, Kevin, to read. Thank you.
Okay, so Anders says someone should make a dark GPT. Let's see. Let me see if I can find it, because there is actually already somebody trained the Chat GPT base model using 4chan's /Paul. So it was like 130 million different blog posts on 4chan's politics thread. And see if I can find it. But it is, what do you expect? So it already exists. I'm not going to link to it, though. Even if I find it, I'm not linking to it.
That thumb on the scale there.
I mean, I don't mind if somebody uses that and creates whatever they want. That's fine. But nah, gonna pass on that one here. Okay. So I think we are just about at the top of the hour. After saying that we wouldn't talk about generative AI, we spent 20 minutes talking about generative AI. So that's actually less than what we've been doing lately.
Yeah, we're slowly backing down.
Right.
Tapering.
Slowly.
Titration.
It wasn't as much of a cat call as it was a pretty good discussion, Kevin.
There you go. There we go. So, quick reminder. Next Tuesday, Stack moderators on strike. That's like every other Tuesday, though. But speaking of every other Tuesday, next Tuesday, Karen Lopez is going to be talking to us at the she's going to do the advanced DBA meeting. That one's already set up. Third Tuesday, Tracy is going to talk about DBA checks. Fourth Tuesday, Melissa Coates is going to talk to us about Power BI governance with Microsoft Fabric. So,
cutting edge.
Yeah, we've got a lot lined up for this month. Hopefully we'll see you at those meetings. All of that's on Meetup, meetup.com/trypass. And with that, we're going to wrap things up for tonight. Thank you, Mala.
Good
Thank you,
night,
Mike.
everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, chat. And until we see each other again, take care.